Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, September 30th, 2024. You will note that we did not begin with music. Usually we do not begin with music because we are trying to make the point that we are doing something of an emergency nature, and often that is bad news. I did not want to begin today's podcast with our musical theme, Hope for the Best, Expect the Worst, because in the 4.5 years that we have been doing this daily podcast, and pretty much the 8 years that we have, or 9 years almost, that we have been doing the podcast all together, but particularly the daily, I don't know that there is a day that we have begun the podcast in a spirit of triumphalism, hope, a sense of achievement, and a belief that something extraordinary has happened to which we need to make note and to pay credit. And that is, of course, not only the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, the world's longest-lived leading terrorist, but the entire remarkable operation that Israel is continuing to perform in degrading and destroying Hezbollah, even as it is degrading and destroying Hamas. This is a day of celebration for us here, unalloyed, uncomplicated, and so we're not expecting the worst. It's been a long time since we didn't expect the worst. Maybe we are expecting tough times ahead and rough times ahead and difficulties ahead, but this is a day in which our hopes for the best were achieved, and I wanted to pay tribute to that along with my colleagues here. That is, of course, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, as we often have him at moments of remarkable note when it comes to what's been happening with Israel since October 7th, indeed was on October 8th. Our friend, the co-author of the Genius of Israel and of Startup Nation, and writer, Commentary Magazine, Commentary Inc. board member, Dan Senor. Hi, Dan. And of course, host of the Call Me Back podcast.
Thank you. It is weird to be on a podcast known for its crushing morosity on a day of just, upbeat joy, optimism, visibility into a path out. So I just don't know where this conversation is going to go. It's a little disorienting being with you all.
Matt, you had something you wanted to bring up?
Thank you, John. I just wanted to make sure our audience knows that this amazing victory by Israel is not the only news that's happened in the last 72 hours since we last talked. And so in case people are ready for this breaking news, I just want to make sure that they're sitting down. But the New Yorker and the New York Times have endorsed Kamala Harris for president. So I know it's a shock to everyone, but I just want to get it out there first.
That could really, really turn the tide in Door County.
It could be decisive
I think
in this
Door
election
County,
contest. Yeah.
Yeah. Allegheny County, these are places that have been waiting.
These are places that are filled with political cartoonists.
Yeah.
And that's
the New Yorker.
Indeed, the New York Times editorial board writes this morning that Kamala Harris is the only patriotic choice for president. So really, there's no more debate to be had.
There's no more debate to be had. Interesting to be lectured on what patriotism is by the New York Times, which has, of course, been a questionable guarantor.
You may recall
of the United States.
The decades of liberal complaining about how conservatives and Republicans question the patriotism of the left. But that, of course, is now tossed into the garbage bin.
Yes.
Because Harris has appropriated patriotism. Therefore, if you dissent from her, your patriotism is up for question as well.
Okay, I'm going to bring up one other thing, and then we got to get to Israel. So here's the other thing I wanted to bring up, which is Saturday Night Live was on Saturday night, as we know, first show. And they did their typical, they had a pretty bad Trump sketch making fun of the assassination attempts, which I thought was pretty scandalous. Even now, I mean, there are many things you could make fun of, but that is not like cricket. Then Dana Carvey came out as Joe Biden, and Dana Carvey, of course, maybe the greatest of the political impressionists of our lifetime, did 2 minutes on Biden. Basically, the entire thing was Biden as a senile Biden, and in the classic situation in which reality outstrips fiction, Biden then came out the next day, was asked about his response to the strikes in Yemen, and said he believed that collective bargaining was really going to turn the tide. So we don't have a president. We have a president who we literally, before a camera, literally just made clear to us that he does not have his mental faculties sufficient unto the day. Clearly, the 25th Amendment is not going to be invoked. But I will say this, that whoever is president came out with a decent statement about what happened in Lebanon and the strike on Nasrallah after a kind of weird period of 18 to 24 hours of silence as the administration tried to figure out what it was going to say. Dan, I think you noticed that in the immediate aftermath, the early stories about this all sourced to Defense Department and State Department officials were that America was furious. We were furious. Nobody told the Israelis, didn't brief us in advance. Nobody told us, and there was fury. Biden was going to give Bibi, he was going to give him a talking to, because this is not cricket. Then, as these stories are emerging, Lloyd Austin is going on television saying they did not tell us, and that's fine. Israel has a right to defend itself. Something weird going on inside the administration where lower level officials, or maybe Amos Hochstein, the envoy, or somebody, got mad because their diplomatic maneuvers were interfered with by the fact that somebody finally brought justice to the United States and others for the murder of 241 Marines in a barracks in 1983, the murder of 89 Jews at the Amla Jewish Center in Buenos Aires, India. The number of events that Hezbollah has the number of terrorist attacks on sources outside the Middle East and in the Middle East, and to Jews and to non-Jews, and the idea that the initial response of the U.S. government would be to complain that Israel had somehow not provided adequate early warning to the United States, which was an act of diplomatic graciousness, since it would then give the United States reason to claim that this was not its event, and so would not have to take responsibility for it if things had gone haywire. Anyway, that's the United States thing. So maybe we should just drop that and just talk about how unbelievable what just happened was, how unbelievable the last 2 weeks have been. I mean, in my lifetime in the annals of war fighting, maybe the first couple of weeks of the war in Iraq in 2003 had the same kind of impact, the astonishing advance of the U.S. Military on all fronts, and using weaponry we didn't even know we had, weapons that, as the late Michael Kelly described as he was standing on a street corner, saw a cruise missile coming down the street in Baghdad, and then it hit an intersection and turned left because it was so precisely targeting, using whatever magical GPS it had to know exactly where it was going along a street grid. Anyway, and Dan, of course, that's experiences that you had as somebody in Iraq later. But let's just revel in what happened. I'm told Jews are not supposed to revel in the misfortune of their enemies, and whoever can say that, I'm sick of this. I saw a whole bunch of liberal Jews and like Shaul Magid of Dartmouth and others saying, I'm not going to celebrate the destruction of... I am celebrating.
Yeah. Well, I would say, obviously there's so much that's impressive about what has happened, and it's actually so shocking in the best possible way, given that and I think everyone in this conversation has felt for the last few months like there was just this, up until the last few weeks, obviously there was this mood settling in within Israel and outside of Israel among those who are supportive of Israel or engaged in what's happening in Israel, that things, like, there wasn't a clear strategy. We didn't really know where things were going. And it was easy to buy into a lot of the sort of conventional wisdom about how stuck Israel was. And then you have this event, and the event reveals like a lot of pieces or themes of conventional wisdom, and as being totally false. Not just like one or two, but like I've actually been, over the course of the weekend, I was jotting down like everything that was wrong, that was revealed to be wrong by events over the last couple of weeks. So here's my initial list. All right, can I bang these out? All right, this
Please,
is
go.
Yeah.
Go.
And by the way, you all will have your own list. Okay, so first of all, October 7th revealed that Israel's intelligence capabilities were no longer what they once were. That the perception of Israel as this intelligence juggernaut was completely turned on its head by October 7th, and Israelis' confidence in their own intelligence capabilities had declined dramatically, to the point that when Israeli security leadership said anything now, that we have a sense that when Iran is going to have a nuclear bomb, we have to do X, Y, and Z. We have a sense for this. We have a sense for that. There would be a big question. There'd be big debates inside Israel. Well, can we trust them? What do they know? Look how much they screwed up October 7th. Look how certain they were. They had this the concept of the security situation in Gaza, and they were completely wrong about that. How can we trust them about anything? Well, what we do know, regardless of I think the Gaza situation, obviously, and the Lebanon situation are much different. But what we do know is basically since about 2006, since after the Second Lebanon War, Israel had built up an extraordinary intelligence capability in Lebanon and also in Iran, and it was expanded and accelerated as a result of the decision in 2012 for Hezbollah to directly engage in Syria. So this is now, I'm not the only one saying this. I've heard that, I'm sure many of you have heard this from various sources you speak to, but Hezbollah's decision at the direction of Iran to go defend Bashar Assad in Syria beginning in 2012, and the bloodshed that resulted, parenthetically, how many Sunni Muslims, hundreds of thousands of Sunni Muslims were slaughtered by Hezbollah since 2012, even up until today. And many of us had believed that war-fighting experience that Hezbollah had gained fighting in Syria made them a much more challenging enemy than Hamas. That is possibly true. But what the Israelis are now saying is, at the same time, by Hezbollah going so deep and making such a big commitment in Syria, Israel had a pretty good penetration of the Syrian leadership and the security leadership in Syria. They had incredible intelligence capabilities in Syria. So when Hezbollah basically integrated into the Syrian leadership and armed forces, it opened up all sorts of channels for Israel to gather information via Syria about Hezbollah. And there's 10 other, intelligence channels that opened up over the last few years. So actually, this idea that Israel's intelligence capability was broken based on what was revealed from October 7th, and therefore no one could trust anything the Israeli security intelligence leadership said about any enemy anywhere. It wasn't only not true; it was like the opposite. Israel's intelligence capabilities and knowledge of Hezbollah over the last few years have been extraordinary, and Israel's been waiting for this fight. So that's one. Two, this idea that there was no path back for Israelis to move back to northern Lebanon, to northern Israel, which I felt. I sit there, Israel moved out 60, 70,000 Israelis from these towns and villages in northern Israel. Benny Gantz, who I just interviewed a couple weeks ago, which we're going to post on my podcast at some point, I interviewed him at a conference. He said, as a member of the war cabinet, it was a mistake for us to withdraw those Israelis. There are about 5 villages right on the northern border. They should have been evacuated. But the idea that we went as far south as we did was a huge mistake. First time in the history of Israel that the Israeli government made the decision to shrink its borders in that way was just a huge setback, because once you do that, how on earth do you get people to move back? It's extremely difficult to get people to move back. Well, after this weekend, I can begin to see how Israel persuades its population in the from the north that it's safe to move back. 3, and I'm not going to rattle all of these off, but I'll do 1 or 2 more just because I'm enjoying this so much. 3, we have been told
there's got to be an encore too. You'll do 5, and then we'll clap for a while, and then you'll come back out and do 6 and 7.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, you'll do 5. I'll do an ad, and then you can do your encore.
I'm not going to do 5. Please, I'll do 2 more. 3, we've been told that Israeli politics and Israeli society has been broken. We were told that all through 2023 during the judicial reform debate. We were told that over the last few months when hundreds of thousands of Israelis were storming the streets of Copland Street in Tel Aviv with these massive protests around the hostage negotiations, seal the deal, bring them home. Society was coming apart at the seams, big debates about the Haredim and whether they should serve or not serve. And we don't have to get into that complicated issue right now. But I think the most worrisome sign in the midst of all of this, particularly in 2023, was during the judicial reform debate when so many, and I mean like hundreds, of Air Force reservists declared that they were effectively going to go on strike, that they would not show up for their weekly, training, the reservists, that they're basically unplugging. And this was the equivalent of, like the nuclear option for Israeli security. If Israel's its reservists are not willing to serve. This is one of the most elite units, obviously the most elite areas of the Israeli military. It's not just the Air Force; it's Air Force intelligence. Israel was doomed from a security standpoint. Well, who do we think conducted these operations over the last couple of weeks, including the one that took out Nasrallah? That was the Israeli Air Force. In fact, if you drill down and look at the exact unit, which many of us think the unit within the Air Force that conducted that operation, it was the exact unit that went on, that declared it would not serve during the peak of judicial reform. And in fact, my friend Amit Segel, who's been on my podcast a couple times, at the time said they should resign, that they should quit the Air Force, and the Air Force should force them to quit. If they're making those kinds of threats, they should quit. Thank God no one made them quit, because imagine if that capability. And so that tells you a lot about, yes, the language, the hysterical language in Israel at the peak of these political debates was used, I think, by a lot of different, characters in the debates in Israel over the last couple of years. But at the end of the day, it was just that. It was language, and they weren't about to actually implement their threats or back up their threats, and thank God they didn't. And then the last one I'll make, just so you can go to an ad or other people can speak, is over the last few days, my favorite part of the last few days was the number of WhatsApp messages I have gotten from friends and colleagues and other official types I deal with in the Gulf states, in the Sunni Gulf. They are in awe. They are in awe of Israel. It's text message after text message. By the way, we've been enjoying the memes going around on social media about like the beepers and the walkie-talkies, and we've been having fun. They're sending me ones in Arabic. They're sending me memes going around, on social media in Arabic that they have to like translate for me because I don't understand, and they're funnier than the ones we've been seeing. They are so celebratory of this massive setback for Hezbollah and therefore Iran, and they are for the first time since October 7th, they are in awe of Israel again. If you think about why these Sunni Gulf states either normalized with Israel or were on a path to normalizing with Israel, as I've said like many times, John, you and I have discussed this a lot, it was never because they had become Zionist. It was never because they viewed Israel as a charity case. It's because they viewed Israel as this, they want to piggyback onto Israeli strength. They saw Israeli strength and partnering with it is key to their own success, survival, and strength. They wanted to partner with Israel while Israel was on the rise, not when Israel was on its back foot. And the big risk of the last year was, in their eyes, Israel was really not what they thought it was cracked up to be. And suddenly, they're back in it. They're back and on. They're like, oh, October 7th, major setback, but probably just an outlier, probably just a hiccup. What they've seen over the last couple of weeks is the Israel they wanted to partner with. And the Emiratis and the Bahrainis in particular took a lot of heat in the Arab world for maintaining their diplomatic relationships with Israel all through this past year. Their embassies are open. Their ambassadors are in Tel Aviv. They're busy doing diplomatic work and commercial work between Israel and these Arab states. They've been vindicated that they were right to stick with Israel during this past year.
Anyways, may I pick up on something that Dan just said? Dan mentioned the word awe in several moments, and it put me in mind of a lot of the essays that Ruel Marc Gerecht wrote in the Weekly Standard after 9/11 about the importance of awe in the politics of the Middle East. He used the Arabic term, which I forget right now. It might be asabiya. I'm not sure which. But the idea was that awe is a critical part of deterrence, especially in the Middle East. And you have to restore awe in order to restore deterrence. And what we've seen in the past few weeks, in particular over the weekend with the strike against Nasrallah, which also killed the senior IRGC commander in the region.
Yeah, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Right.
That's essentially like the elite of the Iranian military.
Right. Is the restoration of Israeli awe vis-a-vis Hezbollah and Iran in the Middle East. And it is coming about, and it's not clear it's fully achieved, but it is coming about because Israel is rejecting the advice of the United States and other Western governments. And I think that particular point needs to be foremost in our minds.
Well, okay.
Can I just respond to one thing?
Yeah.
One point there. In 2015, when Netanyahu gave his address to joint session of Congress or joint meeting of Congress, making the case against the Iranian nuclear deal, and everyone here, or a lot of people here, thought it was a terrible idea. Netanyahu says, I mean, when I interviewed him for my most recent book, he said he didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't part of the plan. But when he thinks about when the path to normalization really got into high gear, it was after he gave that speech. And it's when basically the Saudis and the Saudi leadership began to greenlight for these other countries in the Sunni Gulf to begin their warming of relations with Israel. And when I talked to a number of people, both in some of those countries and also in Israel, what they picked up is they were in awe that only a prime minister of Israel. So here we thought, many people, the critics here were saying, "Oh my gosh, the gall, the chutzpah of Netanyahu to go into the heart of the nation's capital of the most important ally of Israel and the superpower, and to inveigh against the policy of the president of the United States." What they all saw was only Israel could do that. In other words, our leaders could never go do that. Only Israel, only the leader of Israel could do that. And that, again, they were in awe of Israel's geopolitical self-confidence. And so I had never thought about it like the way Matt is talking about, but I think that it's its own form of where they just view Israel as a country that really, really punches above its weight.
And for Israelis to view it that way, yeah.
I was just going to say, our current issue has a piece by Seth, piece by Abe, a piece by Eli Lake. Abe's piece is about Ukraine. Eli's piece and Seth's piece are about Israel. And the cover line on Commentary's October issue is, "Why won't we let them win?" Right? So we connect the fact that we won't allow Ukraine the capability to fire long-range missiles into Russia with the American insistence on ceasefires and diplomatic course and not finishing the job in Rafah and trying to negotiate a non-martial approach in Lebanon. And our question was, why won't we let them win? Well, Israel decided in the past month that it was no longer America's place, or it could not be in a position where it needed America to let it win. And maybe that started earlier. Maybe you can say that started with the daring things that happened over the course of the summer, or even a little earlier, right? The sort of the hit on the Iranian site in Damascus, which then led to the Iranian response, the missile response toward Israel in May that America and the British and others helped turn impotent. And then, of course, things proceeding along with Israel moving forcefully into Rafah at the same time 2 months ago, or whenever that was, pulling off the astounding assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the nominal head of Hamas, in a building in the Blair House of Iran in Tehran, and then just relentlessly
Shakar in the same
forward.
day. And
Fuad
yeah.
Shakar, the Hezbollah commander in Beirut, and that somehow there had been this twist in the tale that Israel was still in the position of saying it was listening to the United States, trying to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas to get the hostages back. Right, 14 different, by some counts, 14 different ceasefire proposals that Israel nominally signed on to that Hamas rejected over the course of time to get the hostages back.
There's something. There's something here.
Let me just finish one thing and then you go. Okay, which is then came the moment of despair and horror, which I think you also can't quite take out of the picture about what has happened since. That was August 31st, when a rescue mission to get 6 hostages out failed because the hostages, including Hersh Goldberg Poland, were murdered in a tunnel in Rafah. And the despair into which Israel sank almost instantly, and the despair to which Jews around the world sank, and the sense that this was all suddenly now going the wrong way, couldn't go on, had to sue for peace, needed to do what was necessary. Israeli hawks had their hearts punched out of their stomachs and were like, okay, we can't go on. We have to do what we can to get the hostages out. We cannot survive this. And I think Israel facing a moment of existential crisis of a very high order, not consciously, not because of anything, maybe because the pager plan got blown, however you want to slice it. Whatever happened, Israel said, the war is on. It is now time for us to win this war. We are going to win this war. And part of that means north. That means we have total penetration in a way that we didn't understand, nobody understood, of Hezbollah. We have been restraining ourselves from using our intelligence knowledge and our capabilities to take the war to Hezbollah because the Americans didn't want it. We were focused on Gaza and all of that. We're going. We're going now. We're going in. We're going. And we can do this in part because we have been so successful in Rafah that, according to the Israeli leadership, Hamas no longer exists as a military force capable of organizing military action. It has now become a counterinsurgency at best. And so it's not that they take their eyes off it, but that they can move. And that scenario then connects to Bibi's speech in July before Congress, because this is the thing about America. It's not just that Israel stopped listening to America. Bibi said in that speech, he said, we will win, and our victory, our enemies are your enemies, and our victory will be your victory. And that's what happened this weekend, because a victory over Hezbollah is justice for a crime committed against the United States that we could not see our way clear 40 years ago to prosecuting and punishing. We didn't do it. There were plans submitted to Ronald Reagan and to Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense. Reagan approved a retaliatory strike against Hezbollah in 1983, and Weinberger cut it off at the knees. We still don't really understand why, except that he thought that we should just pull out, which is what we did. And we pulled out, and justice has never been done for those Marines. And justice was done for those Marines on Friday in Beirut. Their victory, Israel's victory again, Nasrallah wasn't the person who organized it, but their victory was our victory. What Bibi promised, Bibi delivered. That is a world historical event. I'm sorry.
I have a few. No, not at all. I have a few thoughts about a number of things that have been said here, starting with Joe Biden's not being all there. I don't think it's out of the question that this might not have happened had Joe Biden been all there. If he had been strong enough to keep suppressing the instinct that we're talking about here on the Israelis' part, we might be still they might be still mired in this sort of decision blame nether region. I think the fact that Biden is so diminished, I think might have moved their hand a little bit. I also want to say on this point about awe, and especially when you're recounting all the things that Israel has done up to this point, there's something. It's not just that these strikes have been effective, and which is the most important thing, but there's something beyond that. And it's not. I don't want to use the word theater because it's a much deeper point. But there's something so dazzling about the simultaneity of all these attacks, about the implementation of the long game when it comes to the intelligence, when you think about the Beeper operation, about the and then if you take it down to the smaller scale, that the very brief period of time that they had to drop that much tonnage in Lebanon, and then finally, I mean, there's a kind of mastery at work, I think, that is dazzling everyone here. And I have to say, my favorite piece of this is that Israel found a use for the United Nations. Bibi makes this speech at the UN, and reportedly Hezbollah thinks, oh, well, they're not going to move in a bold way while he's out of the country. And then boom.
I mean, it is amazing to think. Bibi
so poetic about that.
Okay, I think I told you guys this, but I told you guys this offline. But so while Bibi's speech was going on Friday morning, I was texting with my sister in Israel, my sister Ruthie Bloom, writer, podcaster. She listened to her podcast, Israel Undiplomatic, on JNS. We're like, he seems tired. Seems a little exhausted. He's kind of stumbling over his words a little bit. He had these two maps. He was holding them up. He seemed to be very awkward. He was like, he wasn't on his game. He wasn't on his usual game, sort of energetic, whatever. It's like, oh, he's so tired. He had to fly there, blah, blah, blah. And now you know that he's standing there on the stage. He's like, did they drop them yet? Is it coming? Did it happen yet? Did the planes take off? How long is it from where the planes take off to when they're going to drop the ordnance? They had 3 seconds to drop 83 tons of armament, in order to make sure that nobody moved from the positions they were in the bunker. 3 seconds, 83 tons in 3 seconds. He's giving this speech with this monologue going on in the back of his head. Now, whether or not this was all part of the plan, they sent him, he went in order to provide the cover, that we don't know.
I want to believe it.
I'd love to believe it. It adds
Trust me. Bibi's advisors have been briefing the hell out of that the last few days. They want to believe it too.
I know, right? Okay, so fair enough. But however you want to slice it, there was this dual thing going on, which is that he is standing there giving this speech saying, how dare you? What's wrong with you? UN, you are a disgraceful organization supporting terror. 70% of your resolutions are about us. What did we do? What have we ever done but defend ourselves and all of that? And meanwhile, in the back of his head, he's on a plane in his consciousness flying over Beirut, waiting for the bomb to drop.
I like to think actually that he's trying not to laugh. And especially because when they leave, when all those guys walk out of the room in the UN, a few minutes later, they're going to find out that the only real safe place in the world right now is in a room with Bibi Netanyahu. Anywhere else.
That is an excellent. But now, before
don't walk
we go
out.
on,
If you're in a room with Bibi,
go on, okay, give me a second here. Give me a second here, because commentary listeners, I'm telling you right now, we're talking a lot about foreign affairs here, but our friends at the Competitive Enterprise Institute are back with new episodes of their breakout Free the Economy podcast. If you're not already listening, Free the Economy features host Richard Morrison exploring opportunities for financial success and self-fulfillment in a world with less government control. Think of the podcast as big ideas meet real-world application to make our economy stronger and make Americans healthier, happier, and wealthier. Check out Free the Economy wherever you listen to podcasts or visit cei.org/podcasts. Let's talk geopolitics, because I said their victory is our victory.
Can I become? Can I do something that I never get to do because I'm usually the eternal optimist on the podcast?
Oh,
this is where I become very pessimistic because we were talking on our text chain about Kamala Harris's statement, which starts out strong, about the attack. She says, he was a terrorist with American blood on his hands, but it ends in, and this is where the geopolitical point comes in and why I'm pessimistic. This upcoming election in the United States is not good for Israel in this sense. We have Trump, who is flirts with the isolationist rhetoric and populist wing of his party, and although has been a friend of Israel during his first term, where it is not clear right now where he's going to land on this. And then we have Harris, who, after praising the fact that Israel did the job that we should have done decades ago, then says, we're still in it for diplomacy. Diplomacy is the solution. We do not want to see a broader conflict. And so she does want to have it both ways. And this leaves American voters with the choice with regard to what is going on in the Middle East. Who do you trust? Both are largely untrustworthy right now if you go on what Trump has been saying on the campaign trail. So I leave that as my negative observation.
Look, you're making an important point. And two things about Trump, I got to say. One is, last week he said some not great stuff. And people who are inclined listening to my voice to think, I got to vote for Trump because he's good on Israel and he'll be the one that all this and all that. Just factor this in to what you understand. Number one, he went off in some weird praise of the nation of Qatar, which is a terrorist-supporting satrapy, a bad actor on the world stage. Kind of horrifying that he did that. Not quite clear why. And second, as he said before, he sort of said Israel.
He invited them to Mar-a-Lago.
Of course.
He was out. That was after.
That's right. Yeah, he had talked to them. That's clearly.
Right. Yeah.
The last person Trump talks to and compliments him is the best person in the world.
Right.
So
there you have it. That's the Qatari emir.
Right. So that's number one. And number two is he again said Israel needs to get this done because it's just what's going on can't continue to go on. It just can't, and it's not good, and it just can't. Now, I don't know what he meant. Nobody knows what he meant. People are taking great heart from the fact that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, wrote this very long tweet about the historic nature of what happened on Friday and the opportunities that are raised by the elimination of Nasrallah and the clear, crippling, if not destruction of Hezbollah along with Hamas. But that's not Trump doing it. Trump didn't say it. Trump's team didn't say it. Certainly his God knows what his vice presidential candidate is going to say tomorrow night in his debate, or the Democratic vice presidential candidate is going to say in that debate.
Here's the thing.
It's going to come up.
We don't need to care. I mean, Christine's right to raise the problems with both of the choices in the presidential election. But the events of the last 3 weeks have shown that Israel is taking command of its own destiny. Israel has not listened to the United States since 6 months ago when the administration was telling Israel and the IDF not to go into Rafah. Ever since, the administration has been saying, de-escalation, ceasefire. What has happened? Israel continued to go into Gaza and continued to attack the Hamas legions, right? And continued to go methodically through the tunnels. And once we had once Israel had Gaza in a state where it is really a mopping up process, going through, trying to get the hostages, killing as many Hamas terrorists that the IDF can find, it then turned its attention to the north, which was always a pressing issue. And there too, Israel took its destiny in its own hands. And the lesson I take from this is Israel is showing the United States how to take our destiny in its own hands. We don't have to be buffeted by events and always whining about how we're playthings of forces outside our control and, oh, the world is so complicated. All it takes is decisive, bold action to reassert yourself and to shape reality in the way that you want it. That is what Israel has shown in the past few weeks. It's what it showed over the weekend.
But we have no candidates who will learn that lesson on our side. Unfortunately.
So I know this is sort of like a runner-up prize, but I do think it's important given the how little we know about what our candidates both candidates would do in this situation if they were president during a moment like this, or what they will do. I do think we can learn a lot from their advisors. And I do think if you think about the people who would populate the senior ranks of a Trump administration, people like Mike Pompeo returning, people like Tom Cotton, we can go through the list of those names that are speculated about. To the extent that Trump ultimately defers to the people working for him on the sort of mucky work of governing and the mucky work of actually having to run foreign policy, I do think I would bet on those folks that would likely be in senior positions in a Trump national security apparatus than those in a Harris administration's national security apparatus.
So can I just add? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just want to add, it's something Matt said. I would just want to add that in terms of taking their own fates in their own hands, they also did that for the United States, not just showed them that you can, but the United States, this all started, remember, the United States was trying to get a deal with the Saudis and Israel, a three-way deal that would include normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And the attacks of October 7th blew it up, because that's what they were almost certainly intended to do, among other intentions. And what Israel has just done is they've started eliminating alternatives. The fate of the U.S. diplomatic project in the Middle East is back on track, because Hamas is beaten into the ground and Hezbollah is too. And so in the Palestinian world, of the two parties, only one of them has two legs and is still standing, and it's the one that we do the diplomatic process with, at least. And then in terms of the North, they've taken away Iran's ability at the moment to swoop in and blow all that stuff up. And they're showing that if you strike a deal with the United States and the Saudis, you'll be protected, which goes to what Dan was saying about reliability. So what they've done is they've actually changed the terms on the ground, the reality on the ground, the phrase we always use about in the Middle East. And now America's involvement is sort of on its own track thanks to the Israelis.
Look, this is, I was going to say 15 years ago, Commentary Magazine had an event at which Fred Kagan and General Jack Keane spoke together. It was our before we did our roasts, an annual dinner, and it was Fred and Jack Keane speaking together about the surge in Iraq, which even the Democrats were compelled to admit had been a success after 3 years of a very extraordinarily difficult and stalemated circumstance in which we had gotten rid of the Hussein government and gotten rid of the Baathists and gotten rid of everything, but the country had descended into civil war. A new strategy was implemented that turned the tide and changed the nature of the war and altered the course of things. And Fred Kagan at that event said, there are words we no longer use in the United States in our military lexicon that need to be reintroduced, because it makes no sense to have a military without them. And there is one word in particular that we do not use, and that word is victory. We need to talk about victory. If we are going to fight wars, wars are won or lost, and we need to talk about victory, and we do not do so. And the Obama administration came in and never talked about victory, did not talk about winning in Afghanistan, did not talk about winning in Iraq. Obviously, it didn't want to talk about winning in Iraq. It did not talk about victory. It basically was this idea that we were going to deploy tens, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines in conflicts that would ultimately be resolved at a table and not through surrender. And the language that Bibi used at the UN on Friday was so striking because he said, we are going to win. We are in this for victory. We are going to defeat Hamas. We are going to defeat Hezbollah. And our victory will be, and then as he didn't say this at the UN, this is what he said at the Congress, our victory will be your victory. The lesson that he can teach, which I think goes to what Matt is saying, is that if we are going to be the world's hegemon and the world's most powerful state, when we have goals, when we have military goals, and this goes to the ones goals that we only support, that we're not personally involved in, and gets right to Abe's point about Ukraine. We want Ukraine to win that war. The sad thing is that neither the Biden administration nor the incoming Trump administration, should there be an incoming Trump administration, is even thinking in those terms. What does it mean for Ukraine to win that war? That's a slightly more complicated question, right? I mean, it could be that the way to win the war is to restore the state of things in 2022. Or it could be that they get pushed out of the territory that they achieved in 2014. That seems like a very, very tall order to try to achieve. But there is no goal, and there needs to be a goal, and we need to be fighting for victory, because you don't, otherwise armies are just kind of sacrificial lambs in a geopolitical diplomatic game, and you cannot do that with people.
Yeah, so John,
using them as toys. Okay,
if you go back and look at every mini war, call it a mini war, that Israel has fought since the Oslo Accords in the 90s, 96, Shimon Peres, 95, 96, when Peres was prime minister, there was the operation in Lebanon. 2002, the West Bank. 2006, Second Lebanon War, and then there were these mini wars in Gaza. 2009, 12, 14, 21. All leading up to October 7th. Every single one of them, with the exception of the Sharon's operation in 2002 in the West Bank, every single one of them ended with a ceasefire, with some kind of mass casualty event that are often orchestrated by Israel's enemies on themselves. And then that's used as a basis for, oh my gosh, the international community has to step in. There needs to be a ceasefire. Literally every one of those, except with the exception of 2002. They all ended in a ceasefire, and Israel then had to fight those same enemies again. They never ended in victory.
Right.
And by the way, it incentivized Israel's enemies to just keep with the same playbook of strike Israel, provoke a war, and then when the war gets too difficult, orchestrate a mass casualty event of your own people, and then the international community steps in, shuts Israel down, ceasefire, rinse and repeat, live to fight another day. And what I think, and I don't know, but what I think we are watching right now is the end of that. Mm-hmm. What Israel is doing, not only in Lebanon, but in Yemen, and God knows what other proxies it's going to take on. And this may ultimately lead to some action in Iran. I don't know. We'll see. I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but I'm just saying, this feels to me like the speech you're describing, John, was not just rhetoric. That there does feel to be like
a paradigm shift.
Right.
It is literally a paradigm shift that and Bibi used the language of victory in 2014, certainly when Israel went into Gaza.
Yeah.
And was not compelled, and was in a weird way saved from the need to do what he was saying needed to be done by the success of defensive measures, by Iron Dome, which protected the Israeli civilian population from Hamas, and therefore made it seemingly unnecessary to do the thing that he even said in 2014 needed to be done, which is that Hamas needed to be destroyed, because Hamas would then fire rockets, the rockets would get shot down, and over the course of that 9 years, even though Israel went back in to Gaza twice or 3 times after 2014, the Israeli public felt safe enough, and this remains a kind of head-spinning thing to think about, for thousands of people on Simchat Torah to go down within 3 miles of the Hamas border to have an all-night 2-day rave without thinking, you know what, maybe this isn't the smartest thing we could do. We're like 3 miles away from them. They could just like storm across the border and kill all of us. But we trust our intelligence. We trust the military to stop them, whatever. And that's the other mojo that got back, is it's not just that from 2006 onward, there were only ceasefires and things. There were a series of intelligence failures, and not just some intelligence successes, but intelligence failures. There was a failed hit in Jordan, where they basically had to poisoned someone and had to deliver the antidote to make sure that he didn't die. Of course, there were whom they released for Shalit in 2011, including Yahya Sinwar, thus making the events possible. And so it's not just that they lost their mojo in terms of victory, but that they lost their mojo, but that this is something that spreads out and has kind of ancillary effects maybe on their abilities, things. Just like in 2006 in Lebanon, I think I've told this story before, but my nephew went up to serve. They get up to Lebanon, the vaunted Israeli military, going to make short work of whatever they have to do because some Israelis have been kidnapped and brought over the border. They get to Lebanon to stock up for the 25,000 people who were up there to cross the border, and they open the stockpiles of material that they need to coats, hats, socks. It's cold. It's cold on the Golan Heights, whatever. And they're all empty because they've all been stolen. And they've all been stolen, people think, by the Russian mob. Who knows? And then, sort of like the sum, my sister and tens of thousands of Israeli parents had to drive 3 hours to the north to deliver clothing to the soldiers that would be warm enough for them to conduct the fight in 2006. And it was that moment where people said, I don't know what's going on here. Something is going wrong with our military readiness and our posture and our standing. But nothing was ever really resolved about that. But so that was like 18 years till Friday, when this astounding intelligence, military, logistical, all hands in triumph took place that continued through the weekend. That's the other thing we haven't even talked about. New leader pops up for Nasrallah, gone. Second leader pops up, gone. Oh, Bashar Assad's brother, who was basically the main sort of connection point with Hezbollah, helping lead Hezbollah to murder those hundreds of thousands of rebels in Syria, his dasha blown up.
Who was celebrating and who was mourning online, let's say, over the weekend. And the more the younger and paler and Westerner and Columbia University-er you were, the more likely you were to be sad about these deaths. And the more Lebanese and Syrian you were, especially Syrians on social media, whoo boy, the happier you were. And what people don't do is they don't make this connection. It's like the Iranians are giving the Russians missiles to shoot at Ukraine. And this Bashar al-Assad's brother was a monster, and he was allied with Nasrallah, and all is like, this is all very much connected. They're all the same team, all these bad guys, and people try to sift through, and they're like, well, maybe Nasrallah was really just, some sort of, anti-colonial whatever grassroots.
He was a revered cleric. He was a revered cleric,
but then they look
according to the Washington
Assad,
Post.
And the two of them, Nasrallah and Assad, and Assad's brother, Assad too, and whoever's running the Revolutionary Guard Corps, is those guys are the main merchants of death in Syria. So we have like this weird thing where nobody will make any connection. Though I mourn this guy. I believe this guy was bad, but they're the same guy.
But this is because I think there's a broader cultural problem here at home, and that's that. Part of the reason that we hear about these revered scholars when a terrorist dies, part of the reason people are, recoil when Bibi Netanyahu speaks boldly in front of the UN is that we have technocrats prosecuting our wars. Other countries now have warriors prosecuting their wars. And we are so used to this kind of cool-eyed, McKinsey consultant speak when it comes to what we're doing for our allies and what we're doing to thwart our enemies. And I worry about this down the line when it comes to China in particular. We cannot technocratically manage some of the geopolitical conflicts that are in our near future. And we need leadership, not that's, kind of all over the map like Trump is right now and the technocratic elite like Kamala represents. And I worry about that because I think we're unused to even hearing the rhetoric of warriors. And we need to get back to finding that to be something that's realistic for our own leaders to do.
Right, but what was Dan saying about the Gulf states and the Abraham Accords countries? Like nothing succeeds like success. Right. And one of the reasons that I have been saying since October 7th that Biden should have gone all in with Israel and not backed off when he backed off is that the single best thing that could happen for him was for Israel to win the war. That politically for him, if he hadn't stopped them in January,
win it quickly.
And win it quickly.
That was a huge thing. The months of drag was bad for everybody. It was bad for the U.S. It was bad for Israel. It was bad for the Gulf states who wanted this thing behind them. It was they wanted to move on. It was bad for everybody.
But just for naked political gain, Israel defeats Hamas and Hezbollah. Let's say now, where we are now had been where we might have been in March. I don't know, just for the sake of argument. And I know, forget Biden's infirmities. There would have been no encampments. There would have been no campus, tentifadas. There would have been no uprisings on camp. It would have been over. There would have been nothing to protest for. And Biden could have walked around saying, we have changed the face of the Middle East for the better. American murderers have been killed. Bad actors are being dealt with, and this is a victory for us as well as for them. And people want to be on the winning side, and Americans are more in support of Israel than they are in support of Arab terrorists.
I mean, I agree with you, John. I think all those things would have appeared, but they would have disappeared much faster if we had put ourselves on the side of Israel from the very get-go and really not belabored the ceasefire process or the kind of bank shot two-state solution Saudi détente vision that National Security Advisor Tom Friedman has been promoting within the White House for the past year. But we do have to recognize it's not just technocrats. The Iran echo chamber is real. There is a pro-Iran, pro-Hamas lobby in the United States. It is a network. I'm going to put on my Joe McCarthy cap for a second. It has infiltrated parts of the United States government. And the messages it amplifies are hostile to Israel and hostile to America, this culture of repudiation, which has been going on now for years. I mean, the idea that Black Lives Matter can move from destroying the systemic racist U.S. and the nuclear family to deciding that Israel also needs to be abolished as a Jewish state, I mean, and seamlessly, right, is testament to this. The fact that Greta, what's her last name? Thunberg. Yeah, Greta Thunberg can move from climate apocalypse, degrowth, ban carbon, go back to the Stone Age in order to prevent the Earth from melting, to Israel needs to be abolished as a Jewish state seamlessly, right? Testifies to this. And we have, so in addition to, I know we don't have the best leaders at the top necessarily, but in addition to following Israel's lead and shaping reality in a way that furthers the cause of freedom in the world, we also have to get real about fighting the intellectual battle against this echo chamber that has been built up quite deliberately over the last 2 decades.
Well, you talk about the culture in this country. One of the interesting, I'm interested to see now what happens to the woke jihad on campus and elsewhere. This is a big blow to them. They had the wind at their back because they felt that they were affecting things, because they were. Now they're not, because Israel is not paying attention to them. Russell Rickford, the Cornell professor, who felt exhilarated
yeah,
on October 7th. Is he still exhilarated? How is it all turning out for you?
Well, that's a very good way to look at it. Like, how is it turning out for you? And that is an interesting question. And I'm just going to go political for a second here. Elissa Slotkin, the candidate for Senate in Michigan, at a private briefing said, and Michigan, of course, is the reason that the Biden administration started going wobbly on the Israel war with Hamas back in November, early December. It reports out of Michigan that the Arab community in Dearborn and elsewhere was turning on the Biden administration, was going to vote uncommitted, was going to do other stuff, was going to turn to Trump, whatever. That is what started shaking the foundations. And Elissa Slotkin warned at some meeting according to Axios, said Harris is not winning Michigan. Now, the polling, much of the polling says Michigan is her best Rust Belt state, or if you want to call it that, blue wall state, whatever you want to call it. The Senate candidate who is running with her just out and out said she's not winning here. Things are not going in the right direction. So let's see what happens here. That means that her line of argumentation about how we need a ceasefire now, I know it's about a lot of other stuff, so don't get me wrong, but it can't be helping. It's not helping her. And this fight that people in Michigan are having over whether or not you're allowed to make jokes about Rashida Tlaib being a terrorist supporter, and that's an act of racism, and all of that is destructive of their interests. And I don't think that the Democratic Party and the way it has conducted itself over the last year has been helpful to the Democratic Party's political future. And I don't care. I'm committed to this. I've been committed to this for a year. And until somebody shows me that it was smart for them to put themselves at arm's length from Israel, I don't know how they're going to show that. But so far, the evidence is not good. And now maybe they're lucky enough that this happened, 5 weeks before the election, because maybe they can take a little credit. She's willing to go to the border and say, I'm going to be really good at the border. So maybe I'm really good at the border. So maybe she can say I was really good in Israel.
She's going to go to the North Carolina devastation from Hurricane Helene, which we haven't really mentioned on the podcast the past week. Yes. We should definitely note that just the terrible loss of life and property and community that's taken place in the Southeast. And now both candidates are scrambling in order to address the devastation. Trump in Georgia, Harris in D.C. being briefed by FEMA, and Biden, I think, going to North Carolina.
Oh, is he going to go? Is he finally going to go?
Well, he said, I'm not going to go because I don't want to get in the way. First, he said that, which, by the way, I don't think is a bad thing to have said. I actually think it's true.
But days late. He should have been. Right. He should have spoken to the American people the day after the
bargaining.
The strike.
What about the collective bargaining?
I do think, though, just one observation on the hurricane. In recent weeks, Harris, even though the race is neck and neck, has been gaining on the personal attribute qualities vis-a-vis Trump. And one attribute in particular is always been the focus of David Plouffe, the former Obama major domo who is now advising the Harris campaign. And that is the question, who cares more about people like you? And Harris has been gaining significant ground. And that can hurt Trump because as a populist, he has often actually had a connection with voters in the idea that he does care with them. He is part of them. I think the hurricane may be an opportunity for both candidates to address this question. And for Trump, this is the region of the country where he is strongest, right? That has been hurt by this hurricane. So I think he really needs to go there and show his compassion for his supporters. And if he does that, that could actually be a net plus for him politically, even though it is, of course, crass to talk about politics at a moment like this.
But the danger there, though, is the last time that he went to visit hurricane victims, he threw paper towel rolls at them.
But he
didn't throw them at them. He threw them to them.
No, I know, but the
media elite, Seth, might not have liked that visit, but I thought it was wonderful.
The question of how he comes off, in terms of compassion.
I don't know. I think
he does the "I'm interested in you" when he talks to you of crowd thing. Well, I'm not sure he does the.
Just think about the Trump turnaround. If Trump becomes president again, it will be the most remarkable comeback in American political history, but more remarkable than Nixon's. And when did the turnaround begin? It began when he visited East Palestine, Ohio. The indictment in New York played a big part, but him going with J.D. Vance to the community where the train had derailed and spilled toxic waste, that was very important. And so that's the type of thing that I'm suggesting.
Well, the commercial that the Trump has for North Carolina is Biden yesterday on that wonderful tarmac appearance that should immediately have invoked the 25th Amendment, asked, is there more that the federal government could be doing to help in North Carolina? And he said no. Yeah. Now, by the way, that might even technically be true.
But that's not what you say. You say we're doing.
You could say we are redoubling our efforts. We are, 24/7. This is the only thing we care about. He said, no, that's a $50 million ad buy. Not that anyone.
I assume
in North
on the way back
can
from the
see
beach,
it.
right? I assume on his way back from the beach. Wasn't that?
Yeah, who cares where he is? He should be in a moisture.
One of the things that's so interesting about that is that this has filtered into pop culture in a way it hadn't before. The Biden is Weekend at Bernie's thing. And so I think that helps them quell the outrage because he's now a joke in a certain way. And people are like, we just want to see what Kamala will do. But I watched last week's episode of this HBO show, The Industry, and there's somebody wants a financial institution wants a bailout. They call the U.S. Treasury Secretary and she says no. And he says, well, what would the president think about, letting all these people get hurt by a bank collapse? And she says, the president thinks we're still at war with Japan. And hangs up the phone. So there's a filtering in of Biden just isn't there at all, and we expect literally nothing from him. That is an interesting way for the administration to kind of skate when he says weird things on the tarmac.
You're absolutely right. And the Dana Carvey, the viciousness in its own way of the Dana Carvey bit on SNL plays into that as well, because of course, by being nasty about Biden, they could be mealy-mouthed and mingy about Harris.
I want to say it was like Glasnost watching Dana Carvey do his impersonation of Biden. It was like, this is what it means to live in an open society where Saturday Night Live mocks the Democratic president of the United States, because I had not really seen that happen. I think in I can't even since Clinton left in a quarter century.
Yeah. Anyway, but if Seth is right, there's a slight political utility to it because Harris is the nominee.
And if Harris becomes president, it will be the same thing and just make fun of Republicans every week.
Yeah.
But finally there was equity. Yeah. There was comic equity.
But I don't think it's good for the Democrats to have Biden be getting more senile. I mean, aside from the country and the world and everything like that, do I think that's good?
And she's in breach of her constitutional duty. She is running for the office and in breach of her constitutional duty. I am sorry. I will keep saying it every time we know that he is not Copus Mentis.
Absolutely. Okay. But the key here is that this is a serious business. There's war in the Middle East. There's war in Ukraine. There's a surprisingly devastating hurricane. Like the thing that happened here in North Carolina beginning on Friday, like the hurricane, we thought the hurricane was over kind of, and then it gathered strength going east and slammed this area that had never
North Carolina couldn't hold. And this is what happened to some extent with Katrina. It's what happened with Hurricane Sandy.
And by the way, that's why we don't know. And we don't know what the political effects are going to be because we didn't know that Katrina was going to hurt Bush the way it hurt Bush until Bush showed up there and then spoke the wrong sentence.
And think about Christie greeting Obama on the tarmac and the final weeks of the campaign after Hurricane
Sandy.
Final week, right? Hurricane politics are very complicated, and this is 2 states, Georgia and North Carolina, that are crucial
states.
Yeah.
And a side issue is that in Hurricane Sandy, I had trouble getting a ballot. So I lived in New Jersey. That's right. I lived in New Jersey, and I had a lot of trouble voting in that election.
Okay, so there's 4 weeks. So there's 4 weeks, and you have early voting, and you can vote on the day of, and all of it if you can't do the early voting and all of that. So it's not the same as Sandy, which really did hit literally a week before Election Day. But if there's going to be an every vote count in North Carolina, let's say, and the election depends on it. How those people in those states feel about the federal government response could turn this election without question. That was not the case in 2012, really, because the devastation was in Democratic states. So, and Obama got that boost from Christie, making it look as though Obama was doing what was good for, what was good for New Jersey. And, so that was
It'd be funny
thing,
if Christie chooses this moment to endorse Harris, and then we kind of have a historic parallel.
It wouldn't be comic exactly, but I do want to read one thing. A friend of the podcast, my dear friend who's been on the podcast, Dan Cass, lives in Asheville, sent me a text yesterday. The scene here is pretty grim. We are relatively okay because we have access to power and internet at my office and a lot of food and bottled water, but there are massive trees down in our neighborhood that made exiting our street impossible. The roads are clear now, but other towns are underwater, wiped out by the floods. The first gas stations with power have 2-hour lineups and tempers are hot. A few of the hotels and city buildings have managed to open with hotspots. There are eerie scenes of hundreds of people huddled against the buildings with their phones. ATMs don't work. Every shop, gas station is operating on a cash-only basis. Most of the area have no power, water, internet. The basic Verizon phone signal mostly doesn't work. So in his neighborhood at 3 a.m., they had a potluck so that everybody could get their food out of their fridge, and they all eat the food out of their fridge before it's spoiled. So, that's just a report from the ground, and that's an affluent person in an affluent neighborhood. God knows what it's like elsewhere. I mean, the arts district of Asheville, which is one of the most entertaining places to visit in the United States, was under 7 feet of water. I mean, this is like, it would be as though Midtown Manhattan were under 7 feet of water. It's staggering. And I mean, so now we have a new X factor in American politics to go with. By the way, we never got a chance. We're going very long, but of course, this is an important podcast to talk about. So Harris was at the border on Friday, right? Friday night, 7:45, she is at the border, gives this speech. I wanted to offer an analogy. I think it's wiped out by the hurricane, so it's not going to matter that much. So she gave a speech. She said, "We're going to be tough," or whatever the hell she said. Was this like a good way of just kind of like trying to reassure people on the fence or her own people that they had some talking point they could use about how they weren't so terrible on the border? Or was this Dukakis in a tank? Is it wise for her to be engaging on the subject of the border, which is a moment of weakness for her, because it just opens her up to looking ridiculous on the same day that the word is released? I don't even know quite where the study is from.
I think it's a
13,000 murderers released into the United States.
ICE numbers, yeah.
Those ICE numbers are important, but the speech is totally forgotten now. Between what happened in the Middle East and the hurricane, the speech, which barely registered on the East Coast in Washington, is not going to have.
Which is why she gave it what
legs,
she did,
right? And of course, the big of we had SNL making fun of Biden, but that same night, Trump was at the Georgia-Alabama game and got a crowd. It's always hard to judge the crowd response because it's this massive stadium, but he seemed to get a pretty good response too.
Yeah.
Well,
and again, the media
got booed. Didn't Walls get booed at a college football game over the weekend at the same time? In Michigan or elsewhere?
He did. He flipped him. I think somebody said "Go Trump," and he flipped him the bird or something.
Okay.
Something classy. Always classy.
Yeah, that's all. But look, Trump. I said bad stuff about Trump in relation to the Middle East. But again, the media Trump disconnect continues in the most bizarre way, and the bubble is just astounding. Brian Stelter in his newsletter and others over the weekend, Trump said Google should be punished or prosecuted or something because Google is screwing with the search results and is making sure that if you Google his name or something, you're seeing an onrush of negative material about him. And if you do the same with Harris, it's positive material. And Stelter and others are characterizing this as some kind of unprecedented assault by Trump on private industry, and he's being authoritarian. And that's like, what the hell is the matter?
The government's trying to break up Google right now.
And
every single one of Elon Musk's companies is under assault from the federal government right now. This is the Trump thing. It's so annoying. It's like, he was president for 4 years. You would think that people would begin to understand how his mind works. He's a pundit. So he says things that it's him like he's on the commentary podcast. Now, should a president act this way? No, but it is the way Trump acts. And you would think that someone like Brian Stelter, who has been rehabilitated by CNN, would recognize that. But of course,
it's also
not where the
But I'm saying he's also right. He's right. Google is putting its finger on the scale in its search algorithms to make Trump look bad. Why can't he complain about that? He can complain.
If you like Trump, you love that he acts like a pundit. That's what you want.
Of course.
That's
But get ready, because if Trump's elected, that's the next 4 years is the same thing we went through. Like every time he acts like a pundit, people who love him will say, "Yeah, this is what we want," and the media elite will live in a 4-year prolonged hysteria.
Absolutely. Okay, so as we close, my commentary recommends is in tribute to the just passed Chris Christopherson, who died this weekend at the age of 88. And Chris Christopherson was a very interesting cultural figure because he became a movie star after being a songwriter, after becoming a recording artist. He was incredibly good looking. He was incredibly charming. He was not only the star of A Star Is Born with Barbra Streisand and a really, really good performance as a sort of wastrel rock star, but he appeared in what I believe is the funniest sports movie ever made, Semi-Tough, about football with Burt Reynolds, a romantic comedy set against the new age culture of the 1970s, where all football players and everybody was going through preposterous kind of treatments and est and all kinds of stuff like that. And he played the kind of blissed out running back who fell for all of the junk.
He's also very good as the love interest in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which I think is a criminally underrated Scorsese film from that period.
Right. And then he wrote 3 or 4 of the greatest country songs and recorded an album called The Silver-Tongued Devil and I that I highly recommend. Was one of my favorite albums as a kid, but he also wrote songs like Sunday Morning Coming Down, which is a song about a hangover, the despair and heartbreak of a hangover, and lived a fascinating life, which you can look up. I won't belabor it. But the most interesting detail of it is, as a highly educated person, a Rhodes Scholar, somebody who actually had an appointment to teach English at West Point after he returned from Oxford and decided he was going to make his fortune as a songwriter instead, had to unlearn his English grammar to write successfully for country music. He had to learn how to say going instead of going, and how do you make grammatical errors in order to write for the people rather than for the poetry magazines. Won an Atlantic Magazine fiction writing contest either in high school or in college. Like, this was a pretty remarkable person.
Can I just say, by the official song title is Sunday Morning apostrophe coming apostrophe down.
Yeah, that's right. He learned his lesson. And also, by the way, one of the 2 stars of Heaven's Gate, the biggest flop in cinema history, in which he is also he was unable not to be charming, and was a sort of a remarkable presence in American life. And so I do recommend The Silver-Tongued Devil and I, if you want to go to Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, and listen to something in tribute to him. As I say, this is the happiest podcast we have ever recorded. I am sorry to have to commemorate it in this way, and I'm obviously our hearts do go out to everybody in North Carolina and Georgia suffering through the ravages of the hurricane. But the world has changed for the better. The world changed for the better this weekend, and we are here for that. So for Abe, Seth, Matt, and Christine, and thanks to Dan Senor, who had to jump off, of course, for his wisdom. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.